All right, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Dave. This is the Radical Independent. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we've got a special guest back with us. His name is Connor Freeman. He is the assistant editor and writer over at the Libertarian Institute. He also shows up quite a bit over on antiwar.com and a really cool podcast that I've been getting into called Conflicts of Interest. I would definitely recommend watching or listening to that because a lot of great information over there with both Connor and Kyle Anzalone. Connor, how are you today? Thanks for being here.
I'm doing great, David. Thank you again for having me on, and thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. So here's what's going on. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on is that at the beginning of the week, I woke up and I'm watching the local news, and when a geopolitical thing hits the local news, it's typically lacking context. I hate to sound like a fact checker, but I'm listening to this report about how Russia suffered this fairly large setback, we'll call it, in the area known as Kharkiv or Kharkiv. I'm not sure how to say it. But what's interesting is that, the media, the Western media in particular, are saying, hey, this is great news. This is what they're saying. It's great news. The Ukrainian army has taken control and they're now on the march and on the move. And it won't be long before the Russian Federation is, completely eliminated from Ukraine, which I kind of find that a little bit comical. But I was wondering what information you had on it. And then, I'd like to talk about what this all means as far as this war in Ukraine. And my first, I guess, inclination is to think that we've got maybe another Afghanistan on our hands. So what's your take on this, Connor?
Yeah, well, certainly, they have made it clear that I mean, we've known for a long time that the Americans, particularly the Americans, the British, the Eastern European states, primarily the Baltic states, Poland, etc., want the war to just keep going on and on and on. They've been the most hawkish. You know, Rome, Berlin, and Paris have been less hawkish, and particularly the Germans, although they do seem to be going along with just about everything. There has been the comment I made in our last show about Russia was that in July, the top six largest economies, including Germany, France, and Poland, and some of these other states, did not contribute new weapons aid to Ukraine, and that has been trending downwards since April. And also, there has been increased trade in goods going back and forth between Europe and Russia. Surprisingly, in a lot of states that have previously been, are sanctioning Russia. Ted Snyder has a great piece about this up at the American Conservative People Should Read called "Is the World Getting Wary of the War in Ukraine?"
Hmm.
And so that's quite interesting. I mean, Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, recently went sort of on the eve of this counteroffensive in Kharkiv and said, he was talking to basically it's a group of defense ministers from roughly 50 countries. I believe it's called the Ukraine Contact Defense Group. And he repeatedly stated, first of all, he announced a new $675 million weapons aid package to Kiev, but he repeatedly used the phrase long haul. And we've seen, throughout the war, we've had defense officials and NATO officials saying that they're going to be supporting this war for years and years to come. In fact, I think it was Milley who told, and it might have been the House Armed Services Committee or something like this a few months back, where he goes, I'm not going to I wouldn't say the war will be measured necessarily in decades, but certainly years and years. And so Austin says, he goes, we're going to be uh, working together to train Ukrainian forces for the long haul. We're going to be working together to integrate Ukraine's capabilities for the long haul. We're going to be working together to integrate for joint operations for the long haul, or joint interoperability for the long haul. And he goes, we're going to integrate our defense industry on a defense industry basis to support Ukraine's requirements for the long haul. We're going to work on innovation and production to provide for Ukraine's war effort for the long haul. And at the same time, Blinken, the Secretary of State, who's a major hawk, well, so is Austin. Austin walked off the board of directors at Raytheon, which has been
Mhm.
making a killing on the war. But
Yeah.
Blinken was in Kiev on another surprise visit, and he spoke with Zelensky and some other officials. And Blinken announced $2.2 billion in new aid, including military, well, it was military aid for Ukraine and also other NATO allies in the region. And one of the I mean, it's like $1 billion for Kiev and then a bunch of other military aid for a bunch of other NATO states in the region. And so basically, and now Zelensky is getting ready to speak to heads of major defense, and he's speaking at a summit of military contractors,
Yeah.
Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and others. And on September 21st, he'll be there on video link. It's a summit in Austin, Texas. And I think Jimmy Dore said he's going to be receiving the award for Salesman of the Year. So,
Oh man.
yeah, so and I think that this counteroffensive, and it's interesting because the Russians they're not really talking about it all that much about what happened. And one of the figures I saw was that they had taken, I want to say 2,000 square miles of territory,
Yeah. Yeah, I
something
heard
like
that.
this, or no, 2,000 square kilometers.
Yeah.
And it might be more than that now. That's from a couple days ago, but regardless, because I know they've taken more territory since, but they've pushed right up to the Russian border. You have civilians in the area fleeing to Belgorod in Russia. There's been reports of attacks from Ukrainian forces inside Russian territory again. A village near in Belgorod, I believe, had to be evacuated. You have Russian installed officials in the region saying that the people there should get out before Ukraine comes, before as they're taking over, because they've launched all kinds of attacks against dissidents, rounding people up even for social media posts.
Wow.
And so, yeah, they send around their intelligence paramilitaries and stuff. And AP did a report on this a little while ago, earlier in the war. It's really terrifying Orwellian stuff.
Yeah.
And so the I mean, basically what happened also was that they had launched previously a counteroffensive in the south, north of Crimea in Kherson, and that failed. There were reports in the Post. They spoke to some Ukrainian, because the Ukrainian officials weren't really remarking about this one, and they spoke to some Ukrainian military people in a hospital. The Washington Post did, and they were saying, for every one guy we get on the Russian side, they kill 5 of ours. We're rationing artillery ammunition because we don't have enough. The stuff we have, we can't even aim it reliably. And basically the whole thing just failed. Now, what I have heard is speculation, and maybe this is true, is that the U.S. or excuse me, that Ukraine was, how they said earlier when the Russians first surrounded Kiev and Chernihiv and some of these cities, and then they backed off and they went and focused on the Donbass. And a lot of people were saying, well, this was a feint. This was just to draw out Ukrainian forces because they had built so much on the contact line with the Donbass, and they started attacking before Putin invaded. In
Right.
fact, that's one of the major reasons why he did invade,
Yeah.
because they had lined up something like maybe even in the neighborhood of 100,000 troops on the other side of the Donbass, and were ready to launch a full-scale attack. And the shelling had vastly increased in the week prior, and then Putin recognized the independence of the two Donbass republics, Donetsk and Luhansk, and then went in 2 days later. And so the idea was that they were trying to draw them out so that they wouldn't have to face them all at the same time, and they could take more territory in the Donbass and sort of wind the Ukrainian forces down. So it is possible that the Russians started to focus too much on the south, because apparently their forces in the Kharkiv region were outnumbered 8-1. And they've
Wow.
pulled back and they've gone back to the Donbass. So what they're saying is they're focusing on the goals of their special military operation, namely liberating the Donbass and protecting the people there. But I mean, it's a huge propaganda victory for Ukraine. And I mean, apparently there's a new weapons package that's going to be coming soon, probably be announced this week. And they are running low on that $40 billion aid bill that was passed in May. And now they're also, I mean, he's asking for it's part of a larger short-term spending package,
Yeah.
but
Right.
that it has to do with like monkeypox and COVID and all disaster, whatever else. But there's $14 billion or so in there for Ukraine.
Right.
Much of it is military aid. It's like $11 billion. There's and I'm blanking a little bit on how it all breaks down, but much of it is like I think almost $5 billion to replenish U.S. stocks, because there's been reporting coming out in the Wall Street Journal, in fact, about how particularly artillery ammunition at the that the Pentagon has is running what they said I think they said uncomfortably low,
Mm.
because we've just been sending. I mean, if you look at it, and I haven't counted it all up, but it is shocking when you read some of these, the write-ups about what is entailed in some of these various weapons packages, and they'll announce that they're sending more artillery systems, but then in terms of the ammunition, it's shocking numbers, like sometimes hundreds of thousands
Yeah.
per package, and so that's not necessarily surprising that they are running so low. So much of this is sent over through what's called the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which
Hmm.
is weapons that in the Pentagon's own arsenal that they send directly to Ukraine. Others are the Ukraine Foreign Assistance Initiative and stuff like this, where they actually contract with arms dealers to send money to where the U.S. Gives money to weapons contractors, and they send it over to Kiev. Now, one of the latest packages that was announced with respect to the latter, they're in the process of developing contracts for weapons systems that won't reach the battlefield for, in some cases, 2 or 3 years. So that gives you an idea of how much longer they want to keep this going. There was a report in the New York Times as well, where they said after this Kharkiv counteroffensive ostensibly went so well, they're saying that the Americans had significantly increased their intelligence sharing with Ukraine before
Hmm.
this. And so that could signal, that the U.S. is getting more deeply involved. And again, we're probably going to see more here before the end of the year about more details about, what the extent of American forces are there. And I don't mean necessarily official
Hmm.
American boots on the ground, but that's always a possibility. But what we do know is that there are, as has been reported in the New York Times, there are these American former special operators who are on the ground there making battle plans, and they're close to the front lines training Ukrainian forces. You have NATO special operations or NATO commandos from Lithuania, Canada, France, and England. And the English special force, the SAS guys, have been there for a very long time. I think that was the first reporting we got about NATO troops actually being on the ground. And of course, the CIA is in the country there, as they say, mostly in Kiev, but we could find out now that it's wider spread. So yeah, it's getting very risky. I know that the Russians have not launched a strategic bombing campaign as the U.S. ordinarily would, hitting civilian infrastructure and destroying, transportation systems and electrical systems. But reports are coming out about power outages in certain parts of Ukraine after this offensive was launched. So it's possible that there is going to be a major escalation on the Russian side as well. There is discussion and a lot of speculation that they're going to launch a mobilization and start drafting people.
Hmm.
Although Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for the Kremlin, who's a very close Putin ally, he
Yeah.
said that that's not on the agenda.
Right.
And so that he was asked if there's going to be a full or partial mobilization. Of course, the Ukrainians have banned men ages 18 to 16 from leaving the country, and they're sending 10.
Wow.
Well, the British want to train 10,000 troops in 120 days.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they're getting a crash course in just a condensed version of British infantry training. Like one of the quotes from one of the commanders, like, we're teaching them how to shoot well and things like this. So
Wow.
it sounds like novices that are being shipped over there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's I'm anticipating before the end of the year here, because that $40 billion bill will run out at the end of this month, at the end of the fiscal year. And so there's probably going to be another large spending package announced. And Congress has been so enthusiastic about all this. Of course, there's such devastation being wreaked throughout Europe economically as a result of the sanctions on Russia. They've, I mean, one signal that things might be getting a little better is on Friday, it was announced because Ursula von der Leyen, she's the EU Commission, I forget what her title is exactly, but they were proposing a price cap on Russian gas.
Yeah,
and Russia's already cut 80% of gas exports to Europe. And, Greece, Italy, I believe Germany, the Czech Republic, they were all against this. At least 10 EU states, were against this. So they had to basically turn around on that. And now they're talking about maybe a generalized price cap or skimming so-called excess profits off of alternative energy producers, nuclear, wind, and coal-fired power plant firms who they say are making so much money now because of the inflated cost of gas. So now you're going to have to you're going to have to recycle that into households. And meanwhile, there's a lot of protests going on. In the Czech Republic, I've seen numbers 70,000 to 100,000 of people from the right-wing populist side and the communists protesting against their own government, saying, end this war, end your arming of Ukraine. We don't support this NATO proxy war, and you need to lift sanctions on Russia. We're not living like this. Look at our energy prices. And there have been similar protests in Austria, in France, and we're expecting to see much more of this. There were smaller protests in Germany as well. And what we continue to see is European officials, just like we have seen here as well, where they will come out and say, we've made a commitment to Ukraine. So basically, we don't care what our people say. But and they're really, I mean, the Swiss are you get 3 years in prison if you raise your heat over 66 degrees. There's some crazy things like this. Macron gave a speech recently where he told his people that in the president of France, he said the era of abundance is over. And so they're all shooting themselves in the foot for this NATO proxy war to bleed Russia and cripple their military, preventing them from ever being able to either defend themselves in a conflict or wage another war. I mean, that was Austin's specific formulation for the policy starting in April, that our goal is to weaken Russia to the point where it can't do the sort of things it's doing in Ukraine. And the real risk, of course, is if you do that, that's an existential threat to their state and to their regime. And those are the instances and scenarios in which the Russians have said that they would use nuclear weapons. If you incapacitate and grind down their military and weaken it to that degree, it makes them vulnerable to an attack or an invasion. And we know now, I mean, we discussed on our last show the risks of all the attacks going on in Crimea, and the Ukrainian military chiefs of staff had come out and said in an op-ed recently with a Ukrainian lawmaker that, yep, that was us. So, and of course, that's Russian territory. So, I mean, I'm sure we're going to see more and more what's coming now as this goes on, and we see the Russian reaction, how they retaliate to this new offensive. But I think this is going to give the warmongers a big boost. And they're going to be saying, because the Ukrainians continue to say, see, this proves we can win. And now they're asking for longer range, like Army tactical missile systems that have a range of like 190 miles, or surface to surface missiles. And the Americans have said previously they won't do it because it could hit Russian territory, and that's too much of a risk. But they've said that about certain weapon systems before, and then they go like with the HIMARS, it's very
Mhm.
risky.
Yeah.
Has a range of about 50 miles, but it can be retrofit with munitions that are even longer range than these systems, and they can reach 200 miles. And they've said many, many times that we support them using these in Crimea, and that is Russian territory, even if the Americans in Kiev don't abide by that. So yeah, I mean, like Austin says, they're in it for the long haul, and they're going to continue this, I guess, until. So I mean, I just don't see them. I mean, we have the new Prime Minister of England, Liz Truss, who
Yeah.
is saying again, just like Johnson, she's actively against negotiations. And as Johnson has said many times, and has actually done this, they intervened to prevent peace talks between Kiev and Moscow. And
Wow.
now, of course, the Americans are saying that once the oil ban is implemented, in with the G7 is doing this, or the price cap on oil, they're going to launch sanctions against people if they against countries if they buy oil above the set price.
Wow.
So
Wow. It's like economic warfare in addition to, just regular tactical warfare. And it's really a frustrating thing to watch as, we had a window, I think, at the very beginning of this where I think diplomacy was certainly something that could have been accomplished if the parties really wanted it. At least the Western nations and the NATO countries. But Connor, it just seems like it's a headlong run right into this. It's going to be another endless war. Instead of getting, regime change in Ukraine, which we already accomplished that a number of years ago,
yeah,
now it appears that they're going for regime change in Russia, which is just insane. I think they've maybe met a foe, though, that is going to be pretty persistent. But it looks really discouraging, though, because, again, between just the regular media, which doesn't really understand the conflict, and they report it from just a tiny vantage point, and they basically just get, I hate to say CIA talking points, but that's what it kind of sounds like to
yeah,
me. Um, and now you've got, countries are really going to suffer over, like Germany, right? They're chopping up. I heard they were chopping up like picnic tables and stuff to make wood pellets, so they could, for all the green agenda, which, again, it's not ready for prime time, and they keep forcing it, and they'll shut down nuclear power plants, and they won't get natural gas, which, burns fairly clean. So they're back to what, wood pellets and coal, which, again,
yeah.
I mean, if you're trying to fix climate change, quote unquote, you're not going to do it with coal. So it's just really a sad thing to see. It almost feels like between the economic agenda, and you mentioned something. I think you said people in the Czech Republic. They're
Yes.
like, you had the populist right and sort of the populist left. And I think this is the most dangerous thing for people who are in power, to see that there are two sides who look at, a few issues, and they say, what, we disagree on a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we do see that, hey, we need to heat our homes, we need to be able to feed our families, we need to be able to, have a fairly decent standard of living. And you're talking about, thermostats. I've heard even colder numbers. I don't do the whole Fahrenheit to Celsius thing all that well, but some really low numbers over in the UK. Like, hey, we've got this plan where everybody's going to turn their thermostat down to about, I think, something like 45 degrees or something like that during the winter. And I'm like, no, there are going to be people, you're going to hear stories. If this is true, people are going to be freezing to death, all for a war in Ukraine, which many people can't find on a map here in the United States. But people just, they gleefully support this, and they don't see the economic ramifications. You want to know why we're having problems here in the United States? Well, we've got a wacky foreign policy. We've got upside down economic policies. We're basically printing money, Connor, so we can, continue this war forever, which causes inflation, devalues the dollar, hurts the economy in just about. I mean, look at what's been going on with the stock market. I think that's like, just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's a lot more to come. And how do you reconcile any of this? And you can't have a conversation with either political party for the most part. There's like a handful of people in Congress who aren't like, full steam ahead. Even people that you would think, hey, maybe they'll at least consider this or look at the fact that this is causing economic devastation here in the United States, but really globally, which again, we're all, whether we like it or not, I mean, we're tied to all these other countries when it comes to, certain things. And, cutting off, Russian oil and Russian gas to Europe is the craziest thing I've ever heard. And I would sit down with these people and say, you know what, how can we stop this conflict? I mean, Russia initially, when they went in there, said what? They wanted to demilitarize and denazify. Those were their goals, right? And especially the second one, right? I don't really have a problem with denazification. I'm hearing this and going, what? And then I did a little research and it's like, yeah, we're sending money to this thing called the Azov Battalion. And then you do a little bit of research and you're like, aren't they like what we used to call, real fascists and real Nazis? And you mention this to people and they go, yeah, but Russia's a bully and they instigated this. And yes, they did go in there. But as you said, they basically had set up where they were going to do something. And I'm not a big fan of this whole preemptive war living through, George H.W. Bush and George, we got to get the terrorists over there before they get us over here. I can hear that little drawl Texas accent. We got to fight them over there, so don't come over here and get us. But I'm done. I'm like, what was it? Enough already. Scott Horton. I'm just stop. So I don't know, where does this go. How. Any insights to that? Like, I mean, how long can we do this? I mean, are we headed? It doesn't look good already for the United States, but are we like going to have to hit rock bottom, like go into a deep depression? I mean, what's going to change this?
Probably. Ron Paul said that we won't come home because because libertarians and anti-war people have been convincing enough and have garnered enough support among the public to roll back the empire. He said they would come home because eventually they'd be broke.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. I don't think Ron anticipated, though, that we would pick fights with Russia and China in such a way, in such a short period of time, the escalations were so vast in such a relatively short window of time. Post Cold War. I mean, really, what's fascinating about all this to me is people think Biden is weak, which is all. I mean, he looks weak. He sounds like he's half dead. He's an idiot, and when he goes on his rants, you can tell that his brain is not firing. Right. And he looks like it looks like a 10-12-year-old girl could beat the crap out of him.
Yeah.
But the real problem is that his policies and his cabinet and his Pentagon and his national security state are even far more aggressive.
Yeah, and they're running wild because he's not going to sit there and object to it. It's like his wife Jill has to kind of lead him around and sit here, honey, and they're gonna talk to you about what they're gonna do next in Ukraine. And I'm sure it's like, okay, guys, sounds good to me, and it's embarrassing. I mean, you're right about the strength issue. I mean, even if I disagreed, which I do, by the way, I disagree with this guy on pretty much every policy he puts out there. But at least, I mean, Barack Obama, you knew he had, good, cognitive abilities and gave a good speech and was a really good shiny puppet. Whereas this guy here is like, he's just there, and they put him in office basically so they could basically do whatever they wanted to do, whether these are people from a prior administration. A lot of people say, Obama and his folks are pulling the strings behind the scenes. I mean, they're all incestuous anyway. I mean, and
Yeah,
some of
yeah.
them used to work for military contractors, and they kind of gravitate from the private sector to the public sector, which to me these days there's really no line. It's in the old days, libertarians used to say, hey man, it's a private company, bro, leave these people alone. And I'm like, it used to be a private company, bro, but now it's a government operation. And everybody, it's like you look at the CDC and all these people that go work for Pfizer and they come work for the CDC, like,
Yeah.
I mean, and
Or
so, you
Facebook
mentioned,
censorship board being run by a bunch of war hawks and people from the Atlantic
yeah,
Council and stuff like that.
the worst people. And it's like, and you mentioned when you said long haul, I thought, yeah, we went from long haul COVID to long haul, never ending war in Ukraine. So you basically think that we're going to have to, go through a lot more hell basically before
Yeah,
people
it,
wake
it,
up.
it may come sooner. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, because one way or the other we're screwed. But I do think that we run a real risk here. So one of the main problems I have with like the Trump base in particular
Yeah.
is that much of their rhetoric is based on this idea that, see, China is escalating around Taiwan. This is all America's fault. But
Yeah.
they say that, and then they say, and look what Russia is doing in Ukraine. This would have never happened on Trump's watch. Trump was such a tough guy. And the real point they're missing in their desire to have their sort of "my dad can beat up your dad" narrative, they're forgetting that they're supposed to be saying that Trump was he didn't start. They always say he didn't start any new wars, and the truth is, Trump was not nearly as, for all his faults, and he is an absolute war criminal and greased the skids and set the stage for brinksmanship with Russia and China and carried out brutal sanctions campaigns against so many countries, starving. We may not know for a very long time exactly how many Iranians, North Koreans, and Venezuelans he killed. Just his sanctions in Venezuela within a year, I believe, deprived something like 40,000 people of medication and killed them. I mean, and of course, set records for all the bombs he dropped in Somalia and Afghanistan and Yemen. And of course, supported the Yemen war the whole time and all of his escalations against the Palestinians and the Syrians, etc. I do think that when Biden came in, he basically kept his Iran policy. He kept his he escalated the Russia and China policies. I mean, in an absurd way. I mean, like, as far as the military provocations of China, it just went through the roof under Biden. All this stuff was going on last year, and people just, I mean, I guess, I don't know if they didn't notice, but like, he escalated over, it was like 125% increase in the number of U.S. ships that have been sent to the Black Sea. They carried out the massive Operation Sea Breeze exercises, like 30 plus countries in the Black Sea, training for war with Russia right on Russia's doorstep. They were the largest exercises held by the U.S. and myriad NATO countries all throughout Eastern Europe. Defender Europe 21, right on Russia's border in many cases. Of course, there were exercises that have been held in Ukraine directly that were hosted by Ukraine, like Rapid Trident 21 and things like this, and all training for war with Russia.
Remember that, unfortunately, this goes back to narrative. Remember, Trump liked the Russians. Remember, that was the whole thing that Trump,
right. Russia ruined everybody's
all
brain.
of that. So when they went into office, they had that, and they don't seem to care that Russia is not, no offense, Russia's not Afghanistan. Russia's not, and this isn't like a critique of the other countries that don't have the firepower or the will, right? And you're again, same thing with China. The Republicans don't like China, right? And the Democrats don't like Russia. So these are two countries that I think you should really try to negotiate with, because China, I mean, if Russia is a bear, China is, a monster. You know what I mean? So, and between the two of them, what are we doing? I mean, we don't care about our own people. This is the problem when you mention, the populist left, the populist right. Those are the two groups that if they get together, they could, I think, make a huge impact. And every so often, they'll cross paths, and it's like you mentioned Jimmy Dore. He's a good example of that. But you don't hear that. You don't. There's nothing in Western media. There's very few voices other than independent little YouTube channels like mine and others that speak truth to power in a meaningful way. I mean, for you to call out Donald Trump like that, you say that to one of the MAGA people, and they're like, yeah, but he wanted to knock the hell out of ISIS, and he wanted to build up the military, and through all these different things that he did, it was basically business as usual with a slightly different rhetoric. And maybe his instincts, I've heard Tom Woods say, every time he had a good instinct, he was basically overruled by somebody that he hired. So it's like,
Right.
If you're hiring war hawks, you're going to get war. I mean, that's the problem.
Yeah, I'll just say with Biden, he has left the Syria policy virtually unchanged. They're starving those people to death. More than 60% of them less, and these numbers are more than a year old.
Yep.
60% of the people are facing starvation. The country, it's going to take hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild that country. Israel bombs it every week, and in often civilian infrastructure. They have Caesar Act sanctions, which are bipartisan, and it just goes directly at the construction sector and the engineering sectors to make sure that they never are able to rebuild after what the CIA and the Saudis and the Israelis and the Qataris and the Turks and the British and the French did to Syria, just destroying it and arming Al-Qaeda types and creating the whole ISIS monster. And I mean, they have not ended the occupation of Iraq. We continue to see the bombing of Shiite militias in both countries, Syria and Iraq. He has not lifted sanctions on Venezuela. They're just carried out these massive live fire exercises, training to decapitate the Kim Jong-un government, taking him out for regime change.
Oh man.
And like I said, with the China thing, they're preparing now. Their discussion of preparing a major sanctions package to deter an invasion of Taiwan. Like the way that works so well with Ukraine. And of course, that would be a complete upending of the one China policy. All this, Trump couldn't have gotten away with this stuff.
No,
I mean, the escalation with China is sincerely unprecedented. What they're doing after that Pelosi, they sent 6 more delegations of U.S. officials.
I was going to say maybe they're going to send. Didn't they? I was going to say they've already sent more people from Congress over there to assure that everything is going to be great. And in the meantime, just the provocation itself is one of the dumbest things you could do. And I when Pelosi went, I'm just sitting here going, they're serious, and they're trying to. I mean, it's bad enough now. We've got Russia and China, and again, these are. Who else has got more power in the world right now, than those two countries? And I think this whole, I'm actually very happy about the whole unipolar, the BRICS stuff. I am so tired of the empire. I'm tired of being a member of the empire. It is good to
see the multipolar world coming into being and seeing all that get ripped away. But the problem is that, and I've always been worried about this, is that the hawks that we have in power now, particularly the neoconservatives and their liberal interventionist analogs and allies, I really don't know what they're liable to do right now.
I know.
The way they're lashing out right now with Russia and China, it's suicidal. It's omnicidal.
Yeah.
They've ripped up every last arms treaty. They're going to probably let New START expire. And like I said, they have troops openly deployed to Taiwan. They're trying to build up a NATO-style alliance. Liz Truss wants to build a global NATO to go and confront China and defend Taiwan and all this. And they're absolute. She said, "I'm ready to drop nukes. I'm ready to do it." And the guy said
that out loud. She said she's ready to drop nukes.
A British television host, before she had been named prime minister, said to her, listen, if you were in the situation where you had to order global annihilation,
man,
I won't ask you if you would do it if it came to that, but how? Because I know you'll say yes, but how would it make you feel? And she goes, "I'm ready to do it."
Wow.
How just you're like Jimmy Dorsett, because Will Porter, my partner at the Institute, has a great write-up about this with the video. But I love what Jimmy Dore said. He goes, who gives a shit how she feels? Like, that's the question. I know you'll
Right.
say yes,
Yeah.
but how would it make you feel?
Does it make you feel good that you're going to end the world? And it's just, I mean, it's like that scenario with Scott Ritter when he's telling me about how basically, we send our ships over to Taiwan, our ships get sunk, right? And then,
Yeah.
we retaliate, we hit like a site with a larger weapon, maybe a small nuke, who knows? And then they retaliate with a bigger nuke. And he basically going back and forth. And I'm sitting here listening to the guy who, Scott Ritter's pretty sharp. And I'm sitting here going, holy crap, we're done. We're toast. I mean, why? I mean, they hit the West Coast of the United States, and then, maybe we survive for a little while. Maybe they call a ceasefire and they say, okay, we don't want to blow up the entire planet. We'll just wait for nuclear winter. And and people don't take this seriously. They think, okay,
Billions of people are going to die as a
yeah,
result of all this. And it's just, even the sanctions and the starvation that's been, I mean, you reminded me with the global winter reference, or the hypothetical.
nuclear. Yeah.
Yeah. Or excuse me, nuclear winter. Because if in the northern hemisphere, if like America and Russia go to nuclear war, or America and China, or all three, the soot rises up and blocks out the sun in the clouds. You have just massive crop failure, and billions are going to die, even in the global south, who have nothing to do with it.
But Connor, there's your solution right there to global warming, right there.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
It. That's what, and not to all go conspiracy crazy here, but there just seems to be no logic to anything lately, and
unless they're trying to just destroy the store.
Depopulation, just these people, they're annoying. They could be prosperous and peaceful, but we could solve these problems, these energy problems, if we really wanted to. But we decide instead to do this carbon tax or whatever we're going to do, and then we're just going to destroy people's livelihoods, the farming, the real food that you're supposed to eat, not the crap they want to feed you. I mean, I can go on and on about all of this because I think it's all tied together. But that's at the end of it all. I have you on as a guest, and I think, okay, he's going to provide insight. And the more I hear about this, whether it's you or Ritter or anybody else I've spoken with, I don't see that. Like, why aren't smart people saying, don't do this, don't do this to Russia, for instance. Don't escalate this war in Ukraine. It hasn't gone well so far. And even if you continue to dump money into this, it's like a pit. And, you come out of it with, hey, Russia is weaker now, right? And Russia was responsible for feeding a whole bunch of people and providing energy, and you're not going to run, the UK or any other country for that matter on solar power and wind power. I mean, I'm hoping someday that's the case, but the technology isn't there right now to do it in that way. But they've convinced everybody, Connor, that hey, by 2035, no more gas powered vehicles for you.
And they're going to probably hit shortages now with these. I mean, you read the reports like I was doing for writing a piece about this for antiwar.com last Friday, and you read what the EU is discussing as alternatives, because well, they can't do they don't want to do they need unanimous vote for all 27 EU nations to get that gas price cap. Yeah. But they were against it on Russia because they're like, if we single out Russia, they're going to cut us off of that remaining 20%. We're screwed. Right. So we got to come up maybe a generalized price cap. And even with the oil price cap, it hasn't been announced yet. My suspicion is, and I've heard this hinted at, they are going to raise the price. Oh, they said even in the generalized gas price cap, they're like, well, we should raise it above what current prices are in Asia, for instance, so that there's still value for whoever or the Russians or whoever to export gas to Europe. One of the other interesting things is this this grain export deal that was negotiated and brokered between Kiev and Moscow, which actually was the only diplomatic success so far in the whole war, but was brokered by Turkey and the UN. The Erdogan said recently that he had spoken to Putin, and Putin said, for one thing, that the Russians are still not able to export their much of their food goods and fertilizer through the ports as they were promised, and that needs to be addressed if there's to be an extension on the deal. Not only that, he goes, he's very disappointed because much of this is not going to the global south and it's not going to poor countries.
Yeah.
The grains and fertilizer leaving these Ukrainian ports, they're saying that it's going to primarily European countries and countries that have sanctioned Russia. So
Wow.
and then, what's interesting too is India and Turkey and China, of course, have increased. I mean, India is setting records for how much oil they're buying from Russia, and they're exporting a lot of that oil. They're exporting a lot of oil anyway to Europe. So it's almost like the Europeans are finding ways to evade their own sanctions on Russia. And
Wow.
Of course, Turkey isn't great now. It's going to be interesting to see if because India is sort of walking a fine line right now, because the US wants them to be a part of the quadrilateral. They are a part of the quadrilateral security dialogue, but that's supposed to be the foundation for this East Asian NATO, where they're going to use to basically to launch a similar policy of expansion right up and surround China, which was already the US plan. They're having difficulty getting all the new bases they want in Southeast Asia, and much of it is all still based out of Japan with the 7th Fleet. But I always try to tell people that the China thing is so important because it's 100% the number one focus of the American empire right now, and has been since Obama. It's the Asia pivot is 2/3 of all air and naval forces and hundreds of bases surrounding China, and they're trying to build all these sort of NATO style alliances to go and take on China. And each time they've put out these national defense strategies since 2018, and the most recent one this year, they come out and they go, no, China's number one, Russia's number two. But it's been so devastating to see, like you said, we should see more protests like what they're doing in Europe right now here in America. And there is such a great opportunity for the American left and the libertarians and the better people on the right to get together and do this. Because the problem is we're just they're very confident, like Josh Rogan said in the post we talked about last time, that the people in power don't really care if we're against this. And the Europeans have made that clear to their own populations, like, we're going to support this anyway. And the fact that you have enough people on the right and enough people on the left who hate Russia or alternatively hate China. And then if you watch these mainstream shows or the ones that are playing the game even in the quasi-independent media, you would just get this impression that that's just how it is. That if I'm on this team, I have to hate China. If I'm on this team, I have to hate Russia. And they have, they're very comfortable right now because there's so much money to be made off of this two-front Cold War. So there's no, especially with the neocons, there's just no incentive to roll back the pressure or to de-escalate, and they never do. And the real thing too is, God, I just saw the other day in the Huffington Post, Trump said, I told Putin that I would nuke Moscow if he attacked Ukraine. I have to go back and read this article. Somebody said that, and now I don't know if I believe him. And I don't even know if that's an accurate quote, but I wonder how, because actually I heard Tim Pool reference that, and he was saying, this is why this never happened on Trump's watch. I'm like, well, what does that mean?
That's
like, hypothetically.
That's not a good idea to even say that, though, if that's true.
I know, because it's like, let's say that's true, and wow, what a badass. So he gets in power and then he nukes Moscow. Is that the plan?
Yeah, that's gonna. See, I'm done with the Cold War. I'm done with the Cold Warriors. I'm done with. I'm not a flat out pacifist. If you get attacked, you attack. You have to defend yourself at least. But we're in a position now where we're spread out everywhere, and we're spreading out more, and our economy sucks, and the people in charge can't even manage the chaos, right? Where people are, they're still paying too much for everything because we don't have money, so we print the money. Like I told my wife the other day, I said, we're just printing money and then we're sending it to Ukraine. This is all going to come back because the value of goods and services, to get these goods and services, it's like the Weimar Republic. You're going to be like carting off, piles of money here. I mean, the supermarket is ridiculous. You can't go out to dinner and not drop $100 in some places where you
Yeah.
could spend 30 or 40 a couple of years ago. And it's all going to hurt the working class and the people who make things work to actually make the country work. And in Europe, I really feel for those people because the people, just the population, they didn't vote for any of this. They thought, hey, these are the gatekeepers. They're going to take care of us. Europe will be prosperous forever. But you mentioned Macron there. It's the end of abundance.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great speech. It kind of reminds me of like Jimmy Carter in the Malaise days. You're just going to have to suffer. This is the best we can do. We're the greatest country on the face of the earth, but suffering is in your future, and you better get used to it. And
Well,
I think that's what's going to be happening in the months ahead, regardless of who takes control of Congress. I mean, the Republicans, I'd like to think that they would some of them would want to, some of the new people or whatever would want to stop this, but I just don't see anybody running around campaigning on the fact that they would put an end to this just endless funding for this war, which to me is a disaster, and every war for that matter is a disaster that we've been in for the last, I don't know, 50 years, 70 years, whatever it is. So and I'm not the expert on foreign policy. That's why I have you on, because you are. So
yeah, I've just been absolutely shocked at how it doesn't end. And they the thing with I mean, they're sending. I love how they're sending over Senator Ed Markey, who's just some like big spender Democrat from Massachusetts, and he goes over to Taiwan and says, "Do you think would you like us to switch from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity? Like, what do you think?" And then Zelensky, well, who is the reporter that was interviewing him? Oh, I'm forgetting, but the guy says, "What do you say to America?" Him and his wife, who just did their Vogue shoot.
I know.
And the guy asks him, "What do you say to Americans who are complaining about inflation and gas prices going up?" Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
And Zelensky goes, "Inflation? Who cares about inflation? We're fighting for the liberal order." And everybody's just supposed to sit there and eat, you know what, from this guy over this. And like you said, I hate to say this. Yeah, it is technically a preemptive war, but we picked this thing. I mean, really, the war had been going on for 8 years. They had launched a war in the Donbass. Their own numbers, which I have to assume are a vast undercount, were that 14, 15,000 people died in that war. And the UN says that, or the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe says that the civilian casualties were primarily taking place in the Donbass. And it was very one-sided, like more than 80% of the civilian casualties. And of course, this all ramped up right before they went in. And Putin had tried to make that, the Minsk II Accord. He tried to make the Minsk Accords work. This was negotiated with the French and the Germans supporting it. Zelensky won on a massive mandate, I believe more than 70% to support this. And that's what the people wanted there, even after they had, suppressed so much of the opposition. But he was threatened by the Nazis, essentially, and they told him that we'll kill you. Basically, you're not the president of anything, and we'll Maidan you all over again. And if you pull back our forces here, we'll send back tenfold whatever you take away. And you're not in charge of anything. And he turns around and looks at the Americans and the EU, and everybody shrugs and goes, "Mm." And so all we did was we escalated the arming of the country under Trump, and then under Biden. And then especially under Biden, and then Biden launches, basically they never could get Ukraine into NATO. You figure, because the German and the French opposition alone would have blocked the ascension. to make him a full-fledged member. So the Americans just launched a bilateral project to just make it a reality, a fact, change the facts on the ground. And they started, of course, we had so much NATO training and joint training and interoperability and all the exercises going on at the same time. You had National Guard troops on the ground, of course, CIA, Special Forces, all these assets of the Americans were deployed there. And this is before the war even started. And we know, because in the months before the war, Zach Dorfman was reporting at Yahoo News that the CIA paramilitaries on the ground were training these guys, including in the United States, at a secret base, I believe, in the South, how to fight an insurgency against Russia. And so then concurrently you have all these quotes from people like General Stavridis, the former commander of NATO, going, oh, yeah, well, what we have planned for them in Ukraine is going to make Afghanistan look puny by comparison. And all these quotes like, we don't know much about fighting insurgencies. Yeah, we're not that good at it, but we do know how to arm one. We do know how to energize one. And believe me, that's what's going to happen now. And so to your point, I agree, like Russia's not Afghanistan, but but I think the real risk is I think they're so committed to breaking Russia's back that they forget that Ukraine isn't Afghanistan either. This is on NATO and Russia's borders. And we're so close to nuclear war right now. I mean, it's as bad as the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Blinken spoke to Lavrov for 25 minutes about that potential bilateral prisoner exchange, and you haven't heard anything since. And it's not like he goes to Kiev, announces new weapons, and then goes to Moscow and talks with Lavrov about, even if it was just to say, he doesn't, I mean, even if it wasn't like actual peace talks, just to keep some channel open. I mean, we have been the fact that we pay Blinken's salary is like enough that I think we should have 100,000 people like there were in Prague protesting in DC. Because I mean, what the aid to Ukraine, if they get this short-term spending package passed, it's going to be nearly $70 billion. We've already transferred over $15 billion or so of weapons. And I mean, they're looking at this. Kathleen Hicks, the Undersecretary of Defense, or the Assistant Secretary of Defense, held that meeting with arms contractors months ago where they were talking about how to support this effort for years. And so that's exactly what they want. And it's just, I think that, and if you look at if you look at Trump, for instance, there's a great piece by Michael Tracy about this group called the America First Policy Institute. And he held a speech there, and their whole thing is that Biden's not strong enough. He's not going in for the kill. We need to really escalate. There's Senator Michael Waltz, who came back from Kiev and did this conference, Republican out of Florida, and he's going, no, we need to send military advisors to the ground now. And Michael Tracy goes, are you serious? Like, where do you get off? Remember Vietnam? And he goes, well, the British are doing it. We should be doing it. And he goes, we should be on there training them. And because they're basically doing what the those NATO countries I mentioned earlier, Lithuania and Canada, France, and they, and then Joni Ernst got up there and said, we need to beat them to a bloody pulp.
I heard her. I mean, these people, they were elected originally as they were populists or whatever. And now I don't know where they're going. I just don't. I mean, there's just, like I said, there's literally a handful of people, like a Thomas Massey or maybe Rand Paul or one of those types. But there's just they're all speaking the same language. And this is why people get so tired of the uniparty. And they just say, there's nobody I can vote for. You can vote for the libertarian. If there's a libertarian on the ballot, the libertarian's going to lose. It's just pretty much guaranteed. You can vote your conscience, you feel good about yourself, or vote for another third party candidate, whatever makes you feel good, just to say, hey, I'm not part of this, duopoly, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, Connor, it's really frustrating because nobody pays attention to important issues, and foreign policy relates to all of the domestic issues that we're confronting, the economic turmoil that we're in. And whether it's Trump or Biden, look, Trump, he's entertaining, right? For a lot of people, it's a distraction. It's the greatest show on earth. I'm going to go watch Donald Trump give a speech, and he's going to say some funny stuff, and I'm going to feel better because I hate Biden. And then Trump's going to get in there. The funny thing is, a lot of the real hawkish stuff can happen under Democrats, even though a lot of people think neocons, it's neo-libs, neocons, they're all kind of the same. But it's almost as if when Biden got in there, it was like, okay, Trump was bad. Biden, hit the accelerator and made it worse. And now we're sitting here going, okay, Democrats years ago used to be kind of anti-war. They used to have some anti-war sentiment, the Pentagon Papers. You think of all the things that happened long ago where you would, even back in the Iraq lead up to the Iraq war, you had Democrats saying, hey, I don't think this is a good idea. Right. You had, John Kerry kind of ran on the whole idea that, John Kerry, think of that. John Kerry ran for president as a guy who wouldn't escalate the war. Right. And now look at who he is, where he is, what he's doing. It's all fake. It's all like a fraud.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, no, that's the funniest thing too, right? Because they said with Trump, they go, well, he's got his finger on the nuclear button. We're going to go to nuclear war. This guy's crazy. And then Biden comes in and he's just 10 times worse. And then the thing with Iran, he's picking a fight with Iran now.
Right.
They're saying the deal is off the table. I mean, since we talked, the Americans are now
Israel.
The Pentagon just signed a contract.
They lobbied the crap out of everybody in Israel, and then they said, okay, we're not going to do it. Don't worry.
Yep. Yeah. They sent the head of the Mossad. They sent their defense minister. They sent their national security advisor to go to Washington to talk to Congress. The head of the Mossad spoke with the head of the FBI, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense, the CIA director, senior State Department officials, all telling them, do not do this, and lying through his teeth. Iran, you can imagine, I gave the Europeans proof that Iran has a bomb and that they've been lying. Oh, yeah, really? Is that why you're not making it public, and why every time you've done this in the past, it never stands up to scrutiny? Because thank God there are people like Gareth Porter out there who'll debunk the hell out of it and show that it's a bunch of forgeries. Yeah. But they go, the Americans are now, the Pentagon just signed a contract is for Boeing in the next few years to sell them the refueling aircraft that they would need to launch an attack on Iran. Biden just flew 2 B-52s over the Middle East that were at different points escorted by Israeli fighter jets and Saudi and Kuwaiti planes. Yeah. And they added new sanctions last week. And Blinken is saying it's unlikely that a deal will come through. And Biden, the National Security Council spokesman, says that Biden's looking for other options now. Like we always say, all options are on the table. But to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, because God, if that could be a real problem, because nobody in the Middle East that I know of has nuclear weapons.
Well, they would be like, hey, can we fire off ours last if they were ever to get to that point? Like it's just for a ceremonial thing. We finally got enough. We finally enriched enough uranium to do like one, so it's just kind of weird how some countries, and I'm not saying that they're going to do like a weapons grade situation. I think you and I already talked about that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny. It's like some countries can have nukes, but other countries can't have nukes. If this country gets a nuke, they're going to be so much worse than us. And we have all the nukes, and we should keep all the nukes because why? Because we've been shown to be responsible. I mean, it's kind of laughable at this stage,
I have a piece called Biden and Allies Continue to Put Iran in the Crosshairs, or something like I forget what the title is exactly, but I have a nice block quote in there from Scott's book, Enough Already, where he talks about how, Israel they have something between probably 200 or 300 nuclear weapons, and they're the only state in the Middle East that has nukes. And I don't remember if I link in there, but there's a great piece by Grant Smith at Mondo Weiss and antiwar.com. People should read about how since the 70s, John Glenn, the astronaut, when he was a senator, helped amend foreign assistance laws so that actually, because he found out about this and was outraged. And technically what we've been doing, giving aid to Israel all these decades, and actually I think in total, if they adjust for inflation, it's something like almost $250 billion or something crazy like this. Yeah. It's ever since the 70s, since those laws were changed, all of that's just straight up illegal. We're not supposed to be giving aid to a country, a nuclear weapons power that's not a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran is a signatory to the NPT. But the thing is, the points that Netanyahu, and I believe it's Ehud Barak, and a bunch of these other neocons and hawks who are close to, who've, have ties with the Israeli security establishment that Scott quotes in Enough Already. They all say basically that their concern about Iran has never been that if Iran gets nukes, which they're not seeking, but if they did, that they would just attack Israel. It's never been the concern about this whole made up thing about there's going to be another Holocaust and they're just religious lunatics. Their real concern was that if Iran got nukes, that their ability to just attack any country in the region at will would be
Diminished.
restricted. Yes,
Right.
exactly. And who knows? Maybe they wouldn't bomb Syria every week at that point. Maybe it would create a situation where there has to be some diplomacy, and Iran and Israel could go back to being best friends the way they were until the early '90s when the Cold War ended, and Israel needed a new reason for all this, the special relationship with America. And so, but yeah, I mean, it's literally because they say in there, one of the quotes, it might be from Max Boot or Jamie Rubin or somebody in there, where they say Iran doesn't even have to test a nuclear weapon for this already to hinder Israel's ability to just act with its with basically free reign, or however they want in the region. Just their latent threat is enough of a threat to their ability to just dominate the region with their nuclear supremacy. So
Even though they don't have a nuke, just them thinking about a nuke, just
yeah,
like they just talk to themselves. Be cool if we had a nuke, huh? Nope, can't say that. Can't say. I mean, this is.
And they increase their uranium enrichment, expand their program, which is again the civilian nuclear energy program, but they do it for leverage. Like they enriched uranium hexafluoride to 60% purely to get the Americans back to the table after Israel attacked the Natanz uranium enrichment facility and all this. And it's so ironic because Israel will go, well, we attacked their nuclear program because they're getting too close to a bomb. Yet every time they attack their nuclear program, Iran often expands their program, increases enrichment, and builds more advanced centrifuges and builds their facilities deeper underground. Then Israel points at all three of those things and goes, see, they're getting closer to a bomb. Well, so it's just this endless cycle. And then you have Congress always falling in line. A bunch of Democrats did this full court press recently to make sure Biden doesn't return to the deal, because they did get close because of the EU. They needed a new crude supplier.
Yeah.
And so they step back. And it's always, I mean, I grew up Republican, so I have a bias against neocons and all the lies I grew up with. I freaking hate Democrats. That they own this new Cold War with China. It's their project. It's Obama's thing. Bill Clinton started the new Cold War with Russia. All this is the Democrats. And then when it comes to things like Iran, which everybody thinks, oh, that's the Republicans. And when Biden gets back in office, he'll get back in the deal because it's Obama's deal.
Right. Nope.
And even if he gets close, the Democratic congressman, they do this massive PR push where they just go, Iran is the leading state sponsor of terror, and they want nuclear weapons, and we can't possibly lift sanctions. We're not killing enough people and depriving them of medicine and food and all this. It's so disgusting to see how hawkish this whole the whole Congress is just so bad. Rand Paul has been the best on the JCPOA out of any lawmaker I'm aware of. Democratic Party. He's to the left of Robert Malley. He goes, why don't you just take the IRGC off the foreign terrorist organization? This is before Iran dropped that concession. He goes, why don't you just do it? What's it to you? When you negotiate with people, you know that you have to give something up in order to get something that you want in return, right? And then Malley is just like, all options are on the table. And this guy was supposed to be the big adult in the room.
Yeah. So. Wow. I think on that note, just because of time constraints here, I mean, you and I could probably talk for quite a long time, and I think I wanted to kind of get to the bottom of some of the details regarding Ukraine, because again, at the beginning of the week, this is like a full court press now with, hey, we had success. Finally, we pushed the Russians back, and so now you could write a blank check for this. The American, just the regular American population is now going to be really enthusiastic because Biden's doing such a good job now pushing back those evil Russians. And that's really, what everybody should get on board with. That's why I've got my little Ukrainian flag lapel pin that I wear and stuff, and I have my little emoji, when I'm on social media. But Connor, where can folks find you?
Yeah,
to read your stuff. I think I did a little introduction, but we might as well conclude with that, just in
sure.
case people want to find out what you've been up to lately.
Sure, absolutely. And we'll talk again soon about Ukraine specifically because before this, Russia controlled about 20% of the country. I don't know how much that's changed yet. I haven't seen
Mhm.
new statistics, but I mean, this is really the first successful offensive Ukraine has had in the whole war.
Right.
So we'll have to see what happens here in the next couple of weeks. I think yeah, we'll just have to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll be who knows if we'll be at
Mhm.
war with Russia, China, or Iran by the end of the year, but they're moving so fast. Anyway, I am at the Libertarian Institute. I'm the assistant editor and a research fellow there. I co-host Conflicts of Interest with Kyle Anzalone. Like I said, find us on any podcast platform, on YouTube, libertarianinstitute.org, writing more and more news articles for antiwar.com as well. And yeah, check us out. We got great books. The two new ones are Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons by Scott Horton, a series of dozens and dozens of interviews on the new Cold War and Iran, all the debunking all the propaganda about Iran's fake nuclear program. And we've got the Voluntarist Handbook by Keith Knight, our managing editor, who's as good as anybody in the whole libertarian movement. He's like, he's the Tom Woods of my generation, and it's a terrific collection of essays of some of the greatest libertarian and anarchist thinkers, breaking down all of your potential objections to anarcho-capitalism and voluntarism, and just it's an incredible selection. And yeah, check out Liberty Weekly by Patrick McFarland, one of my partners over there at the Institute. And we got I'll just cut it short, but the Libertarian Institute it's the best writers and podcasters in the whole libertarian movement. You guys will love it.
Yeah, yeah, they are fantastic, and you do learn stuff because you're not going to hear this kind of stuff in too many other places. Again, Connor, thanks so much for being here. I'm sure we'll talk again soon, and you know, thanks for being here.
Always. Thank you very much, David. I'm looking forward to it.